So my name's Alex Shi. I'm VP of Corporate Development and Strategy at Sama, and I've been working in AI and NLP for the past 7 years, and really focused around developing go-to-market strategies and delivering revenue growth through the implementation of AI at scale. So with large companies, but also with smaller companies, and even with some startups. And I also hosted a podcast called The AI Element that explores some of the biggest issues and toughest questions in artificial intelligence. And I think it's a great way to understand, a little bit more about AI and then some of the subfields, and also what is the most cutting edge research and applications that are out there. So from this presentation today, the goal is to have 3 takeaways. First, that NLP is already transforming virtually every industry. 2, because language is ambiguous, training data sets are often a huge challenge. And 3, I want to prompt you to ask yourselves a question about the ethical supply chain. How do we make choices about the type of NLP that we want to build and what it actually represents and where it's bringing us? So at the outset, I'd like to give you guys a quick perspective on the NLP market. So overall, AI as a category is going to explode by 2026. And at the heart of that is really natural language processing and that global market for it. And I think, one of the ways to think about it is that the interaction model that we're going to have with companies is shifting dramatically. So we saw that, before everybody would go into stores, and that's where, your primary place would be to buy things. Now that with COVID, that's shifted to the internet. And so with that, a lot of the interactions are actually through language, through natural language processing, and through a lot of AI use cases that are driven by NLP. And really that impacts, we looked at a few sectors, but there were really 4 sectors that kind of came out as being the ones that will be the most impacted by advances in natural language processing. So in healthcare, right now it's a very document heavy process. And so there are tons of forms being filled out. There's a lot of, even doctor notes, everything is written out. And so NLP can transform that where, patients and caregivers and even institutions and systems will have much better insights on what's actually happening at the patient level by being able to read, understand, digest, and actually analyze the information that's going through natural language. In finance, this has been something that's been table stakes for a lot of large asset managers, where they actually use NLP to quickly read through millions of articles and highlight what's happening in the world, what's important, and making investment decisions based on that. So that's already impacting a lot of large banks, a lot of insurance providers, and really pushing and changing the way that they operate and the revenue streams that they come in, and actually has transformed some big banks. Yesterday in Korea, there's actually a big announcement where a startup is buying one of the institutional banks that has existed for many, many years. And so we're seeing shifts in the market, and most of that is powered by NLP use cases. And legal, the legal industry is extremely well codified, and it's a language-based system. And so NLP comes in there and can actually completely transform both the interactions that people have. So whether it's collecting evidence through a chatbot, or there's giving advice even through a chatbot and those interactions. And Do Not Pay is a great example of something that's scaled to actually go and try to contest parking tickets at scale through NLP. And then finally, retail. Every single interaction we have online is now driven by some type of NLP interaction. And so whether we're reading a text, whether we're understanding, whether we're writing about a review, whether we're getting advice through a chatbot or through customer service relationship, retail is being upended by AI, and more specifically by NLP. So what does that look like in terms of business impact stories? I wanted to bring this down to 2 concrete examples. IBM Watson, and these are examples that at Sama we work with, and the reason why I bring those up is because we actually understand the outputs that came through. IBM Watson came to us when they wanted to improve their chatbot accuracy. And that actually is powering a lot of what's happening in the internet. So IBM Watson has an API for chatbots that it's an NLP use case that people can plug into their business and actually start having new interaction modes and increasing revenue through that. And so you don't necessarily need to build your own NLP algorithm to actually start utilizing and generating revenues. And what we saw was really just an increase within their baseline. So that means that the base that they're using to actually have those interactions. And what that did was it increased customer satisfaction and increased the amount of people using their APIs, and ultimately increased the amount of value that businesses saw because they actually had a great operating model with a natural language processing based use cases. And so chatbots and others that were able to really push forward the interaction models and the revenues that were being generated. Tribe Dynamics. This for me was fantastic because what they were able to do is really quadruple the amount of brands that they brought into their business, as well as really enable ways to better serve their customers, but also expand into new markets. And the quote that I thought was really powerful was from their VP of operations. And what she said was essentially, we expanded our services to new types of clients and new markets. So having an NLP use case, having an NLP engine within your business can really bring you to new clients, have different interaction models, but also open up completely new markets. And so, we know that there's a huge market. We know the business impact can be directly generated through NLP and through AI. The question now that I want to ask you is, should we be thinking about the layer underneath? Should we be thinking about how we're building the NLP that's powering these use cases, powering this new revenue? And so we're at a tipping point. And one of the great examples, it's a little bit, it's a little bit older, but I think it really tells a telling story of two big companies that got tricked by internet trolls and really had a huge reputational negative outcome that came out of it. So Microsoft put out into the world an NLP model that was on Twitter and whose goal was to learn from interactions with other people that were tweeting. And at a base, it was a model that was very robust and had, it was essentially a nice person to interact with. Trolls on the internet came onto Twitter, and by the way, this algorithm was learning as it was interacting, and so its personality and what was having as outputs was evolving as well. So trolls came on Twitter, and they started sending it racist and anti-Semitic data. So essentially, like prodding it, to asking it questions, posting fake articles, etc. And what happened was that Tay actually became racist and anti-Semitic. And this was completely to everybody's surprise, including Microsoft. But it was foreseeable. Why? Because there are some key problems in NLP that you need to solve for if you're trying to actually utilize it in a real commercial circumstance. The first one is language is inherently ambiguous. The second piece is that even a small margin of error can have huge consequences. And as we saw, if you're only getting data from one type of source, from a racist or anti-Semitic perspective, well, the output is going to be that. And so the big problem that we see is a lack of varied perspectives or proper input. And oftentimes we see data sets that are corrupt or that have bias within them. And there are tons of use cases and examples of this where we see bias in corrupt data sets at scale. So what did that have as an impact? I mean, for Microsoft, that was a huge impact on their corporate reputation. They were essentially the laughingstock of a lot of the business community for some time. And also diminished revenues because of a lack of trust in the AI. And consumers and partners saw that as really like a big red flag. So the solution is, after looking at this and actually diving into it is that you have to have high quality data sets annotated by people that actually care, that are well paid and represent diverse perspectives. Because what that allows you to do is to have very robust data sets that when they're put out in the wild, when they're put out into real circumstances, actually say, okay, no, let's not do that, or let's go in this direction. And so if you have a strong data set as the foundation for your NLP model, you actually see that it generates much better outputs. And NLP needs to speak from all of those voices. It can't be just from one perspective. You really have to make sure that the NLP model that you're building is really based on different perspectives and different voices, so that when it's put out into consumer situations, it actually can respond to those different perspectives as well. And that's really kind of what SAMA has been pushing for, which is an ethical NLP approach. So high quality training data sets for any use case. The ability to actually deliver AI-powered annotations faster through machine-assisted annotation. And then a guarantee, because of the workforce, which is coming from different backgrounds and people that have a voice within the conversation and represent many, many different perspectives, we're really the highest level of quality. And so therefore, the best NLP models out there. And just to give you guys a deeper perspective, the people that work at SAMA are people that were living in situations of poverty and brought out. And that was audited by MIT and by other organizations that looked at this model and said, this is the way that we should be building AI. We should be building it thinking about the people that are behind it, but also this should empower people to be lifted out of poverty, put into better situations. And so since we started, we've actually gotten 53,000 people out of poverty by enabling AI use cases that are transforming the way that we interact with the world and also generating significant revenues for our clients. So if you want to learn more, visit sama.com. Have tons of information about NLP, about ethical AI, and there are also tons of articles online that explain kind of what it is that you should be thinking about when building these type of algorithms, but also as a business leader, how you should be thinking about the inputs and outputs that will deliver the highest results for you. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex.